Hello, everyone. Imagine being the only person in a dark school at night when suddenly footsteps echo behind you, yet no one is there. What would you do if the silence itself was hunting you? The school was a place that carried silence like a burden after the last bell rang. During the day, it was filled with chatter, footsteps, and the constant scrape of chairs, but at night it transformed into something else entirely. The janitor had worked there for years and had grown used to the stillness of the empty corridors, yet something about that silence always pressed heavily on his chest. His shift began when the teachers and students were long gone, leaving him alone with the building's creaks and sighs. The lights were dim, the air was cold, and his mop echoed across the tiled floors like the sound of someone dragging chains. Though he tried to tell himself it was nothing, he often felt the urge to glance over his shoulder. He told himself it was only nerves, the tricks of a tired mind. But the feeling never left. It was not just the silence that haunted him, but the sensation of being followed, as though invisible footsteps matched his every move. The first time he noticed it clearly, he had been cleaning the east wing of the building. That corridor was unusually long, with lockers on either side stretching endlessly into the gloom. He wheeled his cart forward, whistling a tune to keep himself company, when suddenly the echo of footsteps trailed behind him. He stopped, holding his breath, and the sound ceased at the same moment. He turned slowly, scanning the length of the corridor, but nothing moved. The lockers stood shut, the doors to classrooms were locked, and the faint hum of the old ceiling lights was the only sound. He forced a laugh, telling himself it must have been the squeak of his cartwheels. Yet when he resumed walking, the footsteps resumed too, faint, deliberate, and just a beat behind his own. The following nights made it worse, because the footsteps grew bolder. They no longer merely followed, they lingered. He would pause in the middle of the hallway, gripping his mop handle like a weapon, staring down the long stretch of floor. And always the silence came rushing back to swallow him whole. But the moment he began walking again, the sounds would return. Once he spun suddenly in hopes of catching someone off guard, but the corridor was empty. Another time he dropped his keys deliberately, bending down quickly, then snapping his head up to see if anyone was there. Still nothing. The more he tried to rationalize it, the less sense it made. A building might creak, pipes might groan, but footsteps did not fall in perfect rhythm with a man's walk. One night, as he worked later than usual, the lights flickered above him. The old wiring in the building had always been unreliable, but this time the flickering was almost deliberate, as though the bulbs themselves were trying to signal something. Shadows swayed across the walls, long and thin, stretching unnaturally as if bending toward him. He gripped his cart tighter, pushing it faster down the corridor, telling himself he only had a few more rooms to check. Then came the sharp metallic slam of a locker door. It echoed so loudly that he nearly dropped his mop. He turned with a start, staring down rows of lockers, each one closed. His heart hammered in his chest as he approached cautiously, running his hand along the cold metal, trying to find the one that had moved. They were all shut tight, yet the echo still rang in his ears, and he swore the air felt heavier now, pressing him to move forward into the growing dark. He began dreading the east wing. He left it for last, hoping he might finish the other areas and rush through it quickly before the clock struck midnight. But every time, the footsteps returned, louder than before, and the shadows on the walls seemed to play games with his mind. Sometimes, when he turned suddenly, he thought he caught the flash of something crouched low at the end of the hallway, though it would vanish when he blinked. Other times, he felt a sudden rush of cold air brush past him, like someone running just close enough to touch. His nerves grew raw, his nights longer, and soon the silence was no longer silence at all, but a living thing breathing down his neck. He considered quitting, but the job was steady, and he needed it. Besides, how could he explain his reason for leaving without sounding insane? The worst moment came on a Friday night. He had been working his way through the east wing again, telling himself to ignore the sounds, when the lights suddenly went out completely. The corridor was plunged into darkness, the kind so thick it seemed to smother him. He froze, clutching his mop with trembling hands, listening to the oppressive silence. Then the footsteps began again, this time from both ends of the hallway, slow and deliberate, growing closer. He could not move, could not breathe. As the sound closed in from both directions, the air colder with each passing second. He wanted to run, but his legs felt anchored to the spot, and every instinct told him that if he moved, whatever was there would see him. At last, the lights flickered back on, buzzing faintly, and the corridor was empty once again. But something had changed. At the far end of the hall, near the exit doors, a shape lingered. It was not clear, not fully formed, but its outline was wrong, hunched and crouched low, as though waiting. His chest tightened as he blinked, trying to convince himself it was just a shadow. Yet it did not fade when the lights steadied. It stayed still, unmoving, but he knew with an unshakable certainty that it was not simply a trick of the eyes. His breath quickened, his palms damp, and though he wanted to run, he found himself rooted to the ground, staring at the thing that stared back. Finally, with every ounce of will, he turned away and forced his body to move. Walking as calmly as he could back toward the supply closet, his footsteps echoed loudly, and for the first time in weeks, there were no other sounds to match them. But the silence was worse, because he felt the weight of eyes on his back, tracking every movement. He did not dare turn around again. He made it out of the wing, locked the door behind him, and left the building before finishing his duties. That night he went home, shaking, replaying the image of the crouched shadow at the end of the hall. No matter how many times he told himself it was nothing, the memory burned in his mind, sharper than any nightmare. The footsteps had followed him for weeks, but now he knew they belonged to something real, something that did not want to be seen until it was ready. And he feared that next time, it would not simply wait in the distance,